Hello, and welcome back to the Punt Intended Podcast, a Dynasty fantasy basketball podcast and a Sports Ethos production presented by FanDuel. As always, I am your host, Mark C., the Dynasty leader over on Sports Ethos. On today's episode, we're going to do a review of my Dynasty buys and sells from last season. We'll detail some of those wins, ranging from Ivica Zubac to Cam Whitmore, and some of the misses and lessons learned from players like Josh Giddey. And I think this will be important just to basically not only show you, yes, partially my wins, but where my thought process is, how I look to identify buys and sells, and where you can take those lessons learned and apply that to players in this upcoming offseason. A little bit of housekeeping before we get into it. You can find me over on Blue Sky at Mark C. Sports Ethos, and on Twitter at MacAttack145. My writings and rankings can be found over at sportsethos.com with an NBA Fantasy Pass subscription. We already have plenty of content lined out for you for the 2025 draft guide. And yes, there's going to be plenty of redraft content there too, but there's going to be Dynasty-specific articles as well. There'll be stuff as the Dynasty Handbook, how you go about your startup draft, what you should do during season, how you should plan your team, and what considerations you need to take when really building your team, if you're in a rebuilding state, identifying if you're contending or not, and how to actually make those transitions happen. Additionally, today we're reviewing my buy sells article from last offseason. There's going to be another buy sells 2025 offseason edition, so be on the lookout for that. Currently writing that up, and that should be out probably within the next couple weeks here. So, hey, you like what you heard in this podcast? Make sure, get that NBA Fantasy Pass subscription, and you'll get access to 2025 buy sells version. Okay, let's get into this review of the buy sells. And we're going to be sharing our screen for the first time here and sharing some content. So, good segue. Reminder that we are on YouTube. So that's going to be the best way to take in this podcast, listen, watch it, is to go on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. And if you're on audio, I will try to read out whatever stats I'm sharing or reviewing here. So bear with me if I miss some stuff. We're doing our best here. Let's officially switch over to that percent mode. And there we go. Great. This is awesome. Okay. So the reason I wanted to do this buy sells overview is I really do value looking back at a process, seeing what my thoughts were at that moment in time, and then analyzing that and seeing if there's anything I should change there. Was I just a bit unlucky in some of my calls? Or, hey, yeah, I missed here and there's something to be learned here. I'm always that person who asks why, and I want to know why something happened and if that makes sense, if it's repeatable, if it's something that we can expect, or if it's something that we should change my thoughts on, or I rather should change my thoughts on. It is also partially to highlight my wins a little bit, but the purpose really is to analyze the thought process behind the buy sells. Knowing how to identify buys and sells is really one of the core cruxes of Dynasty. It affects probably most every trade you will make, and it's a crucial way to improve the value of your team. Identifying those targets that other managers may not see value in, that you identify, or knowing when to sell high at the right moment to maximize your return. And I do want to stress how I define buy sells, because I think the term has lost a lot of meaning over the years and how some people use it. So, similar how sleepers as a term in redraft leagues have gone, I think, really overused. So I think buys and sells are similar. I talked about this last offseason, the definition of a buy and a sell. But if every Dynasty analyst, every manager is saying that player's a buy, you got to go get him now. Everyone's valuing that player, right? Everyone thinks that player's value is actually higher, which therefore means that player's value actually isn't as high. Not that player's value isn't as high. It means everyone's already properly valuing that player highly, or higher than what they think consensus is. And actually the consensus is higher than everyone thinks. So the player is no longer a buy. Now, as I say here, you want to pounce on these targets before people realize what their actual value is. So you want to get in before everyone else is already in. If everyone else is already in on a player, then it doesn't matter that you got this buy on your team. It's, well, cool. You probably paid the going rate for that player, which was already inflated as it was. And the inverse goes for sells. If everyone is calling a player a sell, you probably are not trading that player at any great bargain value. And I think every manager has experience in that aspect, where you have this player on your roster, maybe it's an aging veteran, a prospect that hasn't shown anything, and you're trying to trade them away, and no one's biting at that. That's basically where everyone's calling this player a sell, but no one actually wants to buy. So their value's in the gutter, and you're better off just keeping the player. That's kind of the concept there. So what I try to do with my buy sells is identify really I don't want to say outlier, but hidden buy sells. The players that people aren't even talking about as buy sells, but soon will be. And then by that point, you have hopefully already acquired that player or traded that player away and gotten value for them. So let's get into the first dynasty buy here that I had last offseason, and that was Ivica Zubac. This is a player that I definitely wasn't the only analyst calling a buy last offseason. And so you may think after that whole spiel on buy sells, why was he even in this article? And that's because I think I was still higher on him than most people. And I think the case was relatively straightforward. The first obvious one was the opportunity and minutes that we projected to be available for him. In the 23-24 season, Zubac only played, 26.4 minutes, which really isn't that much. However, Mason Plumlee wasn't going to be on the team. There wasn't going to be really any other center behind Ivica Zubac last year. And we already saw a trend of the Clippers and Ty Lue shifting from that 5-out basketball they were such a fan on to more traditional with having that center more often. And we saw that shift from the 2022-23 regular season to the 23-24 regular season, where they played a lot more of the center on the court. So, with Mo Bamba was the only center on their roster, basically, besides Zubac, it was extremely easy to envision a scenario where Zubac's minutes were going to increase. And that is exactly what we saw. Zubac played a career-high nearly 33 minutes a game. And with more minutes came more stats. But the second argument I made for Zubac, which I don't think a lot of managers were discussing, and this is where I was higher on him than most even, was Zubac was just a very solid center already. Yes, on offense, he mainly was a play finisher, but that was already extremely good. The 86th percentile on the effective field goal percentage amongst big man on cleaning the glass. He was very effective on post-ups, albeit limited possessions prior to last season. So there's already a lot of evidence that he was already effective in a smaller role. Do we scale that up? Do we see more production? And that was exactly the case. In the 23-24 season, Zubac took 14.3 shots per 100 possession. Last season, Zubac took 17.7 shots per 100 possessions. So not only did he see increased minutes leading to increased production, he saw a greater rate of production per minute and a greater offensive load in his minutes. Most of those increased shots came in the form of increased post-up opportunities and more reps in the pick and roll, with James Harden mainly running the show there and the offense there with the Clippers. As I said previously, Zubac was already stellar on these post-ups on more muted volume, but that truly shined last season, where he actually had one of the highest post-ups per game in the league without much of an efficiency drop-off at all. And that's really, that's one clear lesson here in how to identify a buy. Which player shined in a smaller role already and then has that chance to see that increased opportunity? Zubac is kind of exhibit A there. Clear opportunity, clearly did well in limited possessions already. If we just scale it up a little bit more on each end, do we see Zubac really shoot through? And that's literally exactly what happened. Aiding to my belief that Zubac would see more minutes was the fact his defense was already so strong. Zubac was one of the best defensive centers at the rim already. And you can see here, I basically highlighted in this paragraph that in the 23-24 season, Zubac led the league in field goal percentage of defended shots at the rim, pretty much amongst high-volume centers or players who defended shots at the rim. And he was one of the best protectors in the league that season, and he continued that into last season. And thankfully, he got his flowers making second-team all-defense. He was first-team all-defense or pretty close to it on my ballot. And you might be thinking, why does that matter for fantasy? Well, an all-defense caliber center is one that you should want to invest minutes in. I mean, that maybe sounds really obvious, but it took Ty Lue a couple seasons to figure that out. And more secure minutes, more secure production, more secure role. It was basically a perfect storm for Ivica Zubac to drastically increase his dynasty standing. So what do we have going forward? Zubac secured his extension last offseason already. Yes, the Clippers brought in Brook Lopez. You could argue John Collins could steal some minutes at the 5-2, but we'll discuss John Collins a little bit later. But I think it's pretty likely Zubac still sees about 30 to 32 minutes a game. Brook Lopez takes the other 16, 18 minutes at center, and Collins plays strictly the 4. And you can probably pencil in a very similar Zubac stat line this season as we saw last season. So this was definitely one of the biggest wins here from my offseason buy sells from last year. Next player we're going to discuss here is Dosunmu. This one was I would say a bit of a wash. My stance here with Dosunmu, why I called him a buy, was that with Alex Caruso traded to the Thunder, Dosunmu was, I think, the logical player that could step up into that Caruso role. One who may not start, but typically closes games, sees this high 20s, low 30-minute role, and maybe take a step up in his defense. And additionally, we saw Dosunmu have plenty of opportunity previously and shine in that role, while also growing his three-point game. And that's what I mentioned here, that basically from the 22 to the 24 season, in Dosunmu's year 3, we saw him up that three-point shooting volume to 6.6 threes attempted per 100 possessions and hitting 40.3% on those shots. I mean, that is actually, respectable volume, great accuracy. And we saw Dosunmu kind of put the whole picture together a little bit towards the end of the 23-24 season when Zach LaVine was out injured. I mean, look at this production in that time frame. This was basically the first half of the 2024 calendar year, so the second half of that 23-24 season. In roughly about 36 minutes a game, Dosunmu put up about 16.5 points on 52% from the field, 2.2 threes, 3.3 rebounds, 4.5 assists, and 1.1 steals a game. That is great fantasy production and placed Dosunmu well within the top 75 on a per-game basis. What ended up happening for Dosunmu last season? Well, some injuries did hit. So Dosunmu only saw 46 games. We saw that kind of affect his play a little bit. Technically correct is, of course, the best type of correct. Dosunmu did have his best per-game fantasy season per Basketball Monster with a 128th ranking. But considering his 23-24 season was 133rd, plus you add on the injuries, that's where it's probably a little bit of a wash, and frankly not probably leaning more to the lost side in terms of a buy. And while Dosunmu's minutes did increase slightly from 29 minutes a game to 30.3, none of Dosunmu's per production numbers really changed. So, Dosunmu didn't really capitalize on any increased role, didn't really see more of a role in the offense or the defensive structure of the team. And along with that, that three-point shooting actually also dipped back down. So, Dosunmu's production was pretty much in line, seeing less games, not exactly what I expected for him, at least. I think the lesson here for Dosunmu is that maybe I went in a little too much on that career three-point shooting season. We can go back and look at those numbers, right? His first two seasons, Dosunmu attempted 4.3 and 4.4 threes per 100 possessions with below average accuracy. And so upping that volume and that percentage, that's something I normally say to be a little wary of. Still, I think maybe the injuries played into that a little bit. Maybe that's me trying to make excuses for Dosunmu here. But hey, he has a full offseason to ramp up and recover from those injuries. And I think the same opportunity and role for Dosunmu does exist. So we could see him have a little bit of a bounce back. Maybe bounce back's not the right word, but remind managers that he is a capable guard across the board. Nothing special, but just a good bevy of stats across the board and someone that you can rely on if you need, a starter in that 100 and maybe 120 to 150s range of player. Dosunmu can be in that range on a per game basis. And I've traded for Ayo Dosunmu myself in a league this offseason. So I am more thinking that maybe I'm more of a year late on Dosunmu. And I think based on Dosunmu's last season, you could actually still trade for him on a discount this offseason. That's what I did. It was a salary leak, so that changes the nucleus here a little bit. But I traded Wendell Carter away for Ayo Dosunmu, and I was very happy to do that. So that's maybe an example of a trade that you can make in your league, and maybe you see some dividends by trading for Ayo Dosunmu. Let's go to Zach LaVine here. Yep, and we got a second Bulls player on this list. Former Bulls player, I guess. He was a Bulls player last offseason. But this was just a complete win here on calling Zach LaVine a dynasty buy in the 2024 offseason. Essentially, the crux of my argument was that there's a stink of the Bulls on Zach LaVine. He only appeared in 25 games. He elected to undergo surgery on March 9th, 2024. And that seems like a recipe for disaster, right? But really, when you dial down into his production in that 23-24 season, something felt off there. I mean, look at this percentage difference right here. Zach LaVine shot only 35% from deep on 169 attempts in that 23-24 season. That was well outside his typical numbers. Let's look at a larger sample before that. From 2018 to 2023, Zach LaVine shot nearly 39% from deep on 2,300 attempts. So unless you think LaVine's shooting just fell off because, insert arbitrary reasoning here, I thought it was reasonable to expect those percentages to rise back up to the usual standards. I guess you could say the arbitrary reasoning there could be the foot injury. But my argument with that foot injury was that with a full off season to recover and him getting that time to have that surgery, that we would actually see him not see too many ill effects from that. And, here's my prediction here for Zach LaVine. He was shooting 48.5% previously, dropped down to 45.2% in that disastrous season. If you see his return to his previous field goal percentage, we would see that per game impact return in corresponding fashion. And lo and behold, I was exactly right. I'm patting myself on the back on this, so I was very happy with this call. Zach LaVine actually had a career best year from shooting, I'd say, in terms of his shot making. He shot 44.6% on 7.2 attempts a game from deep, which is stellar. And even better is that LaVine shot an overall 51% from the field, which that number is a career best. Now, the second part of my LaVine equation was that I thought a lot of managers were probably maybe rightfully concerned that, oh, Zach LaVine's going to get traded somewhere, his usage is going to fall off, or if he's on the Bulls, they gear to a rebuild, and then LaVine sees his usage drop off too much for him to be production for us, to give us good production. I thought both of those concerns were slightly overblown. Because, yes, Josh Giddey's in town, came into the Bulls last offseason, but DeMar DeRozan left. And so there's actually still was opportunity for plenty of usage on this Bulls team without taking it away from Zach LaVine completely. And if LaVine were to get traded somewhere, it meant that team is probably valuing his 3-level scoring ability. And while I said that usage could slightly tick down on a different team, I couldn't see it being more than a minor detriment to his fantasy value. I think the usage I think that was pretty accurate of a statement. From 2020 to 2023, taking out that injury-filled 23-24 season, Zach LaVine saw a usage of about 29%. On the Bulls last season, it was close to about 26.5%. A little less, but not dramatically slow. The more concerning aspect was what Zach LaVine's usage was on the Kings, which was a little under 24%. So on the Kings, we did see his offensive role decrease some. Both the field goal attempts and the assists dip down. I think that's where there would be concern for Zach LaVine's future in the upcoming seasons. But I think it's more something to monitor. And at the very least, if you traded for Zach LaVine last season, you probably got him at a pretty good discount. You got an extremely productive year from him. You would have already come out ahead. And I still think you can expect pretty solid production as we're used to from Zach LaVine. Let's shift now to Isaiah Jackson, who I think a lot of managers, including myself, really appreciated his mobility, athleticism, and length at the center position. But there was questions if Rick Carlisle would actually play him enough. Jackson tantalized in flashes, a really impressive block rate, nearly 7.5% his first 3 seasons. Pretty strong there. He averaged 3.15 blocks per 75 possessions, which was a pretty high average compared to the rest of the league. And impressive rebounding rates with 21.5% defensive rebounding percentage, nearly 14% offensive rebounding percentage, total rebounding percentage of 17.5%. Those numbers would play if Jackson got minutes. Unfortunately, we never really saw Jackson have any great opportunity with him suffering that Achilles injury early in the season, which that makes this call a complete wash. I don't really even think there's much to even try to look back at here. He only played 5 games. It was tough to tell in those minutes if Isaiah Jackson was truly a part of Carlisle's plan long-term, or if he would have just still kind of played minutes in the low teens behind Obi Toppin, Pascal Siakam, and Miles Turner. Maybe if I'm trying to be really positive and optimistic on this take, I could say that the extension that Isaiah Jackson signed signifies that the plan was to play Isaiah Jackson more, but there were so much other factors into the context of that extension that I don't think that's really fair to say. And really, I don't have much else here on Isaiah Jackson. The injury sucks. That derailed his entire season, but that's something that I think was basically completely out of my control there, or out of anyone's control. So I kind of actually think that Isaiah Jackson wouldn't have seen more minutes, but we can't know for sure, and we don't know how that one's going to turn out. So it is what it is there, and I'm not going to – I don't incorporate this sort of flukish injury into my look-back analysis or changing my thoughts drastically. Let's go to some of the Dynasty sells now. And this is one I've hinted at the past couple podcasts that we would dive into more. And yes, if you can see on the screen here, and for the audio listeners, it is Josh Giddey. And this was the big whiff here in this article. I don't think there's another way to cut it, really. And we know that Josh Giddey ended up producing very nice counting stats for Chicago, alongside decent efficiency that was fueled by that second half shooting performance. 14.5 minutes on 46.5% from the field, 1.5 threes, 8.1 boards, 7.2 assists, 1.2 steals in 30 minutes a game. Sounds great when I put it that way. That production is very strong. Obviously, like most managers, I love my counting stats for Dynasty and Fantasy. And all that sounds fine and dandy. And the outlook looks pretty secure, right? Yes, Giddey is getting squeezed in restricted free agency by the Bulls, but he's almost certainly likely to sign there on some probably 4-year deal. Be in a similar role with low 20s scoring usage, but roughly 30% assist rate, which plays extremely well. And that's all great short term. And here's why I say more short term. It is all to do with the scoring efficiency and asking the question if Giddey truly is the long-term on-ball option, not just for the Bulls, but for any team. And this was what I highlighted last year. This was looking at Giddey's individual offensive numbers. I pulled these stats from Cleaning the Glass. And if you took a quick surface level look at Giddey's effective field goal percentage, he's been below average his entire career. The effective field goal percentage in the low 50s is not encouraging for a player who needs the ball in his hands. In this past season, Giddey's effective field goal percentage was a little better, was 53.1% per Cleaning the Glass, just an increase from 52.3% the previous season. That's not really that much of an improvement. Now, technically that 52.3% effective field goal percentage last season was slightly positive in the positive percentile at the 51st percentile. But that was actually because Giddey was listed positionally as a point guard, which I would say he's more of a forward who operates on the ball. So really, Giddey wasn't all too efficient for the sort of usage that he saw in the role that he had. And when you dig even deeper into Giddey's numbers, the rim percentage is the biggest war here. So in both of these snippets, they're a little small here on the screen, so I'll try to read them out. Now, the first one is just looking at Giddey's raw rim field goal percentage. That's the percentage that he shot on shots at the rim. This is poor. It's poor. It's basically around 60% at the rim, which is pretty much right around that lower quartile. That is just not where you want to be if you're an effective scorer. I mean, you can see, look, some of the orange here from Cleaning the Glass. Orange indicates positive numbers relative to his position. Short mid, long mid, I guess that's okay. But Giddey isn't taking a lot of mid-rangers, and that also isn't the best shot type. So you're probably asking, well, surely Giddey shot better at the rim this season, Mark. He had to, right? You would be wrong. Giddey's rim field goal percentage this season was 58%, which was lower than both of the previous 2 seasons. Now, you could point to the fact that Giddey was actually assisted on shots at the rim a little less this season. So that's something else. That's another stat that Cleaning the Glass tracks is it's assist percentage at the rim. How many of your makes at the rim were assisted? And normally, a lot of Giddey's shots have been assisted at the rim previously at OKC. But actually, he was assisted more on his makes at the rim this season while seeing a decrease in his rim field goal percentage. So basically, Giddey didn't self-create as much at the rim and yet shot worse on those shots. That doesn't sound like a good positive correlation there. And if you just want to zoom out to Giddey's 2-point percentage, yes, overall, Giddey's 2-point percentage was worse this season. So the reason why Giddey's field goal percentage increased was just because of that 3-point jump. So what are you more willing to believe as a basketball analysis? Are you more willing to trust that Giddey's 3-point percentage will hold and that his 2-point percentage and his 2-point field goal percentage issues will get better? Or do you believe that the 3-point percentage for Giddey dips back down some and Giddey remains inefficient due to some of those 2-point shooting woes? I mean, honestly, I think that we have a greater track record of Giddey being a poor interior scorer and being fine on threes, but not to the level he was last season. And yeah, this is why I just don't believe in Giddey long term. But the thing is that the Bulls are probably going to give him the same role that he's had, and you probably will be secure in that role for at least 2 seasons. It just takes one NBA team to believe in Giddey and give him that role and for those counting stats to come through. And that's the lesson from Giddey here that I'm trying to apply to other players, is that even if I do not believe in the player personally, I have to see if an NBA team believes in the player. And if they do, then that's what I have to use for the stats. When the Bulls sign Giddey long-term, I don't think it's going to go anywhere these next 2 seasons. I think the Bulls are going to be committing to a middling team, even in the Eastern Conference. But if they give him the role, they give him the contract, then it is what it is, and that's what I have to analyze. So a player that I'm applying this lesson to is Paolo Banchero, who I don't really rate as that positive of an on-ball option. I think the Magic would be better off if they scaled down his role on ball, maybe played him a little more off ball, a little more off cuts and different actions, yielded more possessions to Franz Wagner, yielded more possessions to Desmond Bane. But everything the Magic have done indicate that they are going to let Paolo be Paolo and let him dominate on ball. And because it's so obvious that the Magic believe in him, the counting stats are going to follow, and I'm not tipping him down too much in my rankings. I don't think the team will be better off for it, but if you're a Paolo Banchero dynasty manager, you'll be better off for it. So that's good for you. So even though I don't believe in Giddey, I don't think there are positive indications here. Now, this last line here still applies today. Last line is, there's an argument to let Giddey build his value during the season before trading him away. I'd still probably be willing to cash in on Giddey's perceived value today. But, hey, you probably would get a good, solid year-and-a-half production where maybe people think his dynasty value has stabilized. Then you can trade him away for even more. And just to reiterate, I didn't mention this earlier, but I'm going to mention this now, that just because I have a player as a buy, it doesn't mean I'm in love with them. It just means I think their value is higher than what it would cost to acquire them in a trade. And the same here goes for sells. It doesn't mean I don't think all the players I have as sells aren't necessarily solid dynasty assets, but I believe you can garner more in a trade for them than what their fantasy production will be for dynasty. And why I'm mentioning this now is that I actually made a trade for Josh Giddey recently. Yes, I traded for a player that I seem to clearly hate. Or not hate, but not like as much as others. And I traded away Shaedon Sharpe in Big Ten for Josh Giddey. And yeah, Josh Giddey wasn't a player I was targeting that hard, but that was a deal that came across, and I felt that was good value for him, even with my lower perceived value for him. So you can trade for players that are sells if you think you're getting them at a discount. It is clearly possible. All right, let's shift to the next player here. That is enough time spent on Josh Giddey. Let's move to John Collins. This is probably a little bit of a whiff as well. I don't think it's as big a whiff of Josh Giddey, but it was a small whiff here. My main argument for selling John Collins wasn't that he doesn't produce decent stats. It was that he doesn't have a great effect on winning games, and this past season would be probably the last season you could really capitalize on the just counting stat production. So I'll go through some of the stats here. We did see John Collins increase that three-point shot. We did see him nail a good amount of his shots from deep. Now, he hit 37% of his three-point attempts 2 seasons ago on nearly 6 threes per 100 possessions, which is actually the highest rate of his career and a pretty good percentage. But the issue I had with John Collins is that it became extremely evident that he cannot even be a moonlight as a center, that he was a pure forward on the court. And I have a lot of lineup data shown on here, and I'll do my best to summarize it. But the gist of it is that John Collins, as the center, yielded a pretty putrid defensive rating that no team serious about winning should implement. So when John Collins was on the court, the defensive rating was roughly about 124 points per 100 possessions 2 seasons ago. And when John Collins was off the court, that lowered to about 117.5, which is a pretty stark difference. There were some factors you could look at. Maybe the shooting was a little fluky here and there, but it really wasn't anything too outlier. And even more damning was the overall on-off for John Collins. When John Collins was on the court, the net rating of that Jazz team was 4.5 points worse. And even on a tanking team, that is not positive. And if you're only factoring these, I pulled this because I knew someone might say maybe there were funky tanking teams at the end that really messed off that data. Nuh-uh. I filtered this for only games that John Collins played in. So you're not getting some of this silly season March and April games in. Now, John Collins did share the court sometimes with Walker Kessler 2 seasons ago. So I filtered that out separately. And basically to illustrate when Collins was playing only as the center, or really playing as the only center in those lineups, and the defensive rating noticeably tanked, and you see a similar net rating on-off difference there. So that was kind of a lot of my argument there, along with the fact that Taylor Hendricks was in the picture, and I thought the Jazz would prioritize him over John Collins as the season went on. We'd see John Collins' value fade. He wouldn't have much trade value, wouldn't get to a favorable destination, whether on the Jazz or another team this offseason, and then you pretty much lost the value in John Collins. However, Taylor Hendricks went down with that broken leg injury. But in the beginning, it kind of looked like that was the case. John Collins' minutes were actually down early last season as Taylor Hendricks was starting. And then once Hendricks went down, Collins' minutes rose up. Even, John Collins started starting some games, and we saw him produce well and see that the shot was somewhat back, hitting some threes, hitting him at a good clip for 2 consecutive seasons now, and being a credible forward in his own right, and adding some rebounding and general size. Now, with that move to the Clippers in this offseason, I think he will see some good minutes still. I expect some production for at least this upcoming season. I think he's still more of that, fringe starter, and he's a little bit of a tough fit with that larger forward archetype who can't play up the center and who isn't the best spacer. But I think he'll still give you some production, and he'll find a role on some team over the next few seasons, albeit probably not as good production on a permanent basis that we saw last season. Let's shift to the last player in this article, and that's going to be Cam Whitmore. And again, I'm going to highlight here that this was not at that moment in time, I hate Cam Whitmore section. It was not. Now, I had him 5th on my 2023 non-Dynasty big board. I had him 120th in my 2023 August Dynasty rankings. I actually had Whitmore move up in the 2024 offseason, where he sat 107th in my Dynasty rankings. But I saw Whitmore getting a lot more inflated value than I felt comfortable with, and he was definitely a relative sell, more than a sell. He wasn't a sell at any cost, but he was a sell if you got good value for him. And why did I say that for what appeared to be a promising second-year player? Well, it wasn't the scoring was necessarily bad. He had a rookie season effective field goal percentage of 54%. He shot 36% from deep on strong volume, about 12 attempts from deep per 100 possessions. 38% of his shots attempts were at the rim, where there's some clear standout scoring metrics for Whitmore from his rookie season. There were some glaring red flags, or in Cleaning the Glasses case, blue flags. And you can see them here on the screen with really poor assist percentage and a really poor assist to usage percentage. Assist to usage basically indicates how often you're passing the ball versus how many possessions you're taking. Whitmore was in the 0th percentile amongst forwards in assist to usage percentage. And if you watch any amount of Cam Whitmore over these past 2 seasons, you know he's looking to shoot and then shoot and then shoot some more and then shoot it again. He makes Cam Thomas look unselfish. For reference, Cam Thomas had about a 0.51 assist to usage ratio in the 23-24 season. Whitmore was at 0.24. Absolutely just bottom of the barrel there. And it wasn't much better this past season. It was, I think, something in the 0.3 to 0.4 range in the 11th percentile. It's still quite low. And then, so clearly, Whitmore did not rack up assists, right? A woeful 1.8 assists per 100 possessions. And you could say, hey, that's just one of 9 fantasy categories. It's fine if he doesn't contribute there. And that wouldn't be a problem if Whitmore didn't also project not well in rebounds, steals, and blocks. Whitmore's rebounds, steals, and blocks were just not really that impressive either. About a 17% defensive rebound percentage, which isn't too shabby for a forward, but it's not some impressive number either. Defensive stats, 1.8% block percentage, 1.7% steal rate. None of these are volume add categories. And that held in his second season with the Rockets, where all these were pretty much the same. While his scoring efficiency took a drop as well with the Rockets this past season. And none of those stats are enough, even if you project his minutes to be starter level, none of those stats were enough to sustain fantasy impact. His only projectable fantasy impact categories were points and triples. And if you're only positively contributing in 2 stats, it's just hard to raise you that much higher in dynasty rankings. And you could say, yes, the Rockets were a deep team, but I don't think Whitmore did anything to prove himself to us either in his limited stint. And, did he not get minutes because the Rockets were deep? Or did he not get minutes because he wasn't that great? It's probably some combination of both there. And now, going forward, you could say, hey, the Wizards were tanking. Whitmore should get chances, right? This is his chance to shine. Whitmore is #unleashed. I don't know if you noticed, but there is a lot of players on the Wizards that should get chances besides Whitmore. He is not the only prospect or young player on that team. And I don't think Whitmore is necessarily a priority of them. And so if you just compare this offseason to last offseason, Whitmore's dynasty value is much, much lower. And this is an example of where you can capitalize on the hype around a younger player and get something more concrete for that value. Especially when the upside of Whitmore, it wasn't even really all that great to begin with. That's why I recommended selling Whitmore. And if you did that last offseason, you definitely paid some dividends. A similar trade I did last offseason, kind of in this vein, was trading away Noah Clowney for Denny Avdia. Kind of capitalized on the bubble of Noah Clowney. And finally, I was kind of holding off a little bit on any trades that I had plenty of other trade offers for Clowney last offseason in that Dynasty League, but I was kind of waiting to see what I could get out. And as the offseason drew on, in my inbox came across Denny Avdia for Noah Clowney, hit that accept button, and it's been a clear win. An example of where people may see the vision with a prospect, and you just say, yeah, sure, take it. I'll take it because I know I'm still getting a good player and one that already has proven himself way more. And that's a way that you can use these prospects' inflated values and sell them and pay dividends. Sure, I mean, could Whitmore or Clowney have hit and made me look a little silly? Sure. But at the same time, if you're still trading for a good asset, you're still going to be fine. And I think you sometimes have a lot of upside to gain by trading these prospects or younger players who haven't really proven anything besides potential, and then trading them for something a little more concrete in value. That will do it for this episode of the Punt Intended Podcast. Again, if you listen the whole time, please hit that like button or leave a rating or review on your podcast platform. If you like how we presented this, going through this information, let me know in the comments below. I'd love that feedback and love to hear if you think I can improve on any aspects. Just let me know, and we'll try to incorporate that on future pods. Hopefully you enjoyed this buy-sell review, and you can then apply these lessons learned. And if you liked what you saw, we will have a 2025 offseason buy-sells article coming out in the next few weeks. Otherwise, we will see you next time on the Punt Intended Podcast, presented by FanDuel.